After playing Starfield for 500 hours, this is going to be my review of the gameplay thus far. I did not go into New Game Plus 1, but I have beaten the game and done almost everything in there. I'm close to 100%ing it. It's difficult considering the amount of things you have to do, but I'm powering through. So I'm going to touch on the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between. I'm going to touch on all aspects of the game just at a high end so that I'm not going into too much detail and bogging down into the very, very specifics. But this is a good overview for anybody who's about to get into it and they want some advice or information on the long-term aspect of the game. The overall gameplay and setting of the game in space, obviously, has been interesting to say the least. Because Bethesda hasn't done anything like this before, it was just interesting to see them pushing into the realm of the expanse. You know, with when you dig into space with video games, you know, there's a give and take in terms of what you're going to focus on because you're doing planets and such. So I kind of wanted to go over the main things that the game suffered from and also gained from them doing this move. First up is graphics and loading times. So the graphics on console were capped at 30 FPS for performance-wise. At 1440p with the average graphics card, you're looking between 60 FPS and 65 FPS. But when you go to the more higher end graphics cards, anything 4000 series and above, you're looking at 85 FPS plus. At 4K, it's between 50 and 60 FPS for the average graphics card and 60 to upwards of 95 for the higher end ones. Again, I'm thinking 4000 series and above. The loading times on PC range anywhere from 8 to 15 seconds when you're loading into the game or between scenes or something like that for the average experience of the game. But for most console, like I'm a console player myself, it can range between 10 and 30, sometimes upwards of 45, depending on what you're loading in. Glitching and crashing. As with every RPG, it's going to come with some glitches and some crashes. The issue that I've seen the most in complaint-wise for Starfield is the amount of crashing. Glitching, I haven't heard a huge amount about, and the glitches I have heard are pretty consistent. Some are off the wall, but the more consistent issues with the glitches are their game breaking. So in terms of like the map opening and loading crashes, that is probably one of the biggest ones I've seen. I sometimes am scared to be in certain locations and just open up my world map because it has crashed my game so many times, and I'm just console. So it's not like I'm bogging down a really heavy, you know, PC because I'm pushing the limits of the graphics. This is just me trying to do it. It'll glitch and lag, and then I'd say 90% of the time I get into my map, but 10% of the time it could just crash out of nowhere, and I don't know when that's going to happen. Another common glitch is vendors and NPCs straight up disappearing from where they're supposed to be, and invisible enemies. So I've had a mission myself where I had to kill a boss to continue, and it was a story mission, and the boss was straight up invisible and could not be damaged at all. So I had to just shoot where I saw the bullets coming from, and no damage would be dealt. I reloaded the save several times. They wouldn't appear, so I had to end up restarting. Luckily, I wasn't too far into the game, but it was a serious issue. Mission glitches were a very big common issue in the before the patch they just put out. The patch they put out didn't solve a lot of problems, but it solved apparently a lot of the mission glitches that were happening to people, where a key person that they needed to speak to wouldn't be where the marker would put them at, or they wouldn't give them the dialogue option. They would just stand there looking at them and no dialogue would come up. I saw a few things like that happening to story missions, so people were unable to progress through the story due to that glitch, which supposedly has been fixed since then. Our map overview. So compared to other Bethesda titles, obviously this one's the biggest they've ever tried to get right. The map is very expansive. It has over 1,500 planets and moons. I read an article the other day by IGN stating that one person has explored every single place that you can go to in the game and 100%ed each of the planets in terms of finding all the fauna and flora, as well as the anomalies. There are countless systems with different types of stars. Would have liked to see more space anomalies such as black holes or clusters of comets, or just a comet even. I know they're trying to make it realistic and at the same time not realistic, but in doing just the focus of the planets and the moons, they kind of lost space. You know, there's not just empty space everywhere. There are things other than just suns and moons and the occasional asteroid that you can go to. There are comets, there are different types of stars even that they could have really gone into. And from what I've seen in the game thus far, they have different types of stars, but not nearly enough interesting ones. I feel like to have a rival like No Man's Sky, which failed so horribly and then also did so good in so many other aspects, one of the ways No Man's Sky got it right for physics nerds or gaming nerds who are just really into space games is they had black holes, they had binary pulsars, they had different types of stars and environments space-wise, not just RNG a planet to something interesting. It was RNG a system into having different things that are interesting. So aspects like that were just really awesome in the game. I think that they could have included something like that into this and it probably wouldn't have been so difficult, but I know the math that the game has to run in the background to maintain those kinds of RNG things is a little bit boggy, hence the glitches and errors that happens and crashing in the game, but that would have been nice to see. Planet topography is RNG, as we all know. It kind of just rolls the dice whenever you go to the planet to see how it's going to be in the area in which you land. You get an overview of the planet before you land if you scan it, but it seems pretty simple in terms of the options you can have. It's basically swamps, mountains, plains, or deserts that on the surface you can land on. And the planet itself can just pretty much ranges in terms of temperature. It's either going to be too hot, too cold, have a lot of mountains, or be like Earth and kind of in that sweet spot. They even have a Goldilocks zone indicator, but even still, it could just be too hot or too cold still based on how the planet's placed closest to the sun that it's orbiting. I feel like they could have included some more interesting features on the planets themselves other than just temperature and topography. I know, again, this may be me asking for a lot, and just because I'm a physics nerd, but there are some planets that exist in real life that are literally made of diamond, and that would not have been too difficult to make in the game. They could have just made it look good, could have just done one. And there's some planets that the axis is tilted so far and the winds are so heavy that it literally rains sideways on the planets. One planet in particular, it rains glass because of the atmosphere that it has, and those little things right there would have just been interesting to add in as a tidbit. You could have just thrown it up on the little sensor at the bottom and given the effect, but going into the detailed environments is probably more than what they were shooting for, as opposed to just giving you the environment itself. Compared to Skyrim and Fallout, the map is obviously larger and graphically and aesthetically pleasing for sure, but it could have been better in terms of how it was executed compared to those games at their time. We weren't looking for 4K Skyrim when Skyrim came out because 4K wasn't there, but now that we have 4K Starfield, which we do have 4K Starfield, I just expected slightly better assets in the game that to me just felt like it felt a little short because they were focusing so much on the expanse, they missed the minute. Then it was mostly small things for me, like there's an example of a video I watched where in Fallout, someone dug into a slice of cake, an NPC did, and you can see the fork cut the cake and then them eat it, and then it clicked over to Starfield, and the same person scooped up a piece of the cake with a fork, none of the cake moved. The cake just part appeared on the fork and then they just put it in their mouth. They didn't actually like eat it, and then they just stick it back down and do the same motion again. I'm not asking for everyone in the game to have cake being eaten properly, but it's just little details like that that they didn't really hone in on, and it just looks sloppy and lazy. Just don't include the people eating if that's such a big deal for you to not go into that detail for it. Planets with flora and fauna look amazing, and compared to No Man's Sky, I think it even kind of holds true. No Man's Sky definitely has the more vibrant video game look, and Starfield's supposed to be the more realistic look, so I understand the aspect of not going too wild and too Dr. Seuss with the planets, so I agree with that. But when you compare this again to No Man's Sky, and No Man's Sky has all the same things, but a little Dr. Seussy version of it. So I understand why they took a step back from that and kept it in the realism world. But again, No Man's Sky beats them out in terms of the space and planet anomalies, because in No Man's Sky you have the planet building aspect of things where you can literally go into the planet itself, and they'd have different things in there that could be anomalous as well. So I felt like they fell a little short on that, trying to get the realism aspect on the planet so well. The main storyline. The story progression in this game is actually much better than I thought it would be. Each story mission has enough conversation to keep me invested, but more importantly, they have enough combat and interaction that makes me feel involved. I don't feel like I'm just hitting AAA on the conversation. I'm actually paying attention to make sure that what I'm agreeing to doesn't immediately get me shot. The game definitely leans more towards the decision-based progression than any of the RPGs they've made thus far. My favorite type of open world RPG is one where the decisions I make can alter the way certain things happen. I know Fallout and the Elder Scrolls series both have certain aspects of that, but even in like Oblivion, you couldn't just join Mehru's Dagon. That's like not an option for you to do still. You have to follow through the storyline and finish it like it's supposed to. And in the end, it kind of weighs out in terms of if people like you or not. In this game, a lot of the decisions you make can alter the way it ends. The main story also progresses your level further than I thought it would, much more than I anticipated. The RNG of the game still gives you a decent chance of getting okay armor, weapons, and also with the levels, which is between, I'd say, probably 15 to 25, maybe 30 levels you get just from doing the initial run through if you only did the story missions. So it really is more of a leaning towards you wanting to do the main story as the game starts, but it does have a slow start. That's the only downside to the story. It's a lot of talking and you getting the down low on a lot of science stuff, and not many people like that aspect of games. They like the science thrown in with, you know, interaction. You need to be engaged with it, and it doesn't really do that for quite some time starting off. This game, unlike the rest of the games from Bethesda, almost incentivizes you to do side missions. Fallout is probably the closest I would say in terms of you running into side missions that seem like main missions, but this one is just the same way. It's just giving them to you sometimes. Just by walking around hearing a conversation in a bar can throw a mission into your mission log that you don't even know about because you may not have even been paying attention, but when you read it, you'll see what it asks you to do. Companions. Different companions bring different dialogue and interactions through different storylines that you're going to play through. Sometimes they can even develop into a romantic relationship between you and the companion you're with. You have 20 companions to choose from, and you can gear them up however you'd like, while having up to 8 in your crew to help you in both space fights and base maintenance. I gave my companion nothing but grenades because I realized I don't use them a lot in combat, so while we're fighting, they're just chucking grenades the entire time and you see explosions all the time, so you can get some pretty interesting interactions and fights. Factions. So the factions in Starfield are a lot more like the factions in Fallout, where it's much more advantageous for you to try and go through your faction missions before you start really doing story stuff, just because you get a better idea of both the game, the history of the game, and all of them are very engaging, while also giving you good gear and levels. So here are the factions that you can join. Constellation. Constellation is going to be the main faction that you join when the game starts. It's who you're with throughout the storyline. They're the astrophysics, slightly religious group. You basically are joining them for the discovery of the origin of life. United Colonies Vanguard, or as more commonly called, UC Vanguard. They're the most dominant faction / government / military in the galaxy. They are primarily military and politically based. They're almost like the America of all the factions in the galaxy. You can join them by going to the massed headquarters on Jameson and talking to the commander in the back left of the room. Ryusian Industries. They're basically the Microsoft and Amazon of the galaxy. They have more corporate espionage and tactful missions than any of the other factions, and they routinely request discreet completion of their objectives. They don't want a lot of dead bodies and shooting, so if you're not really into the whole stealth thing, maybe save theirs for a little bit later in the game. You can join them by applying at the red kiosks in the New Atlantis Commercial District on Jemison. Freestar Rangers. They're basically modeled after the Rangers of the quote-unquote Wild West movies that you'll see, where you see sheriffs walking around and stuff. That's essentially how they're modeled, how they talk, and how they're seen throughout the galaxy, but they're like the galaxy's marshals. You can join them by going to Aquila City on Aquila and handle the bank robbery that's going on in the primary part of the city when you walk in. The Crimson Fleet. They're essentially the space pirate faction that you're going to run to constantly while playing this game. You can actually join them by doing the UC Vanguard faction mission I mentioned earlier when you join them. After the first mission, Super et Ultra, which is their slogan they use, you get access to the Deep Cover mission, where you go in deep cover into the Crimson Fleet for them. Space and planets. So graphically speaking, I've already said, I think that the land and spacescapes are beautiful. They have great coloring and great texturing, but sometimes that falls a little short. Obviously, it's an RPG. I can't expect perfection. Every game this large, or somewhat as large as this, has texturing issues and glitches in terms of that, but there are plenty of examples of when you can see heavy frame drops, so you can experience those heavy frame drops, and when the texturing starts to blend a little. As I mentioned before, I also do see the hole in the small asset / object detail that I feel they just missed out on, where they could have either not included those things at all or just executed them better. The example I gave earlier was the food being eaten, but not to completion, or even actually changing the food that's being eaten as it's eaten. The RNG of space events I do love. I love the random encounters when I drop out of hyperspace. I know there's a lot of community favorites, such as the sea shanty ship or the extended warranty ship. I've also had school buses or private cruise ships where everyone's asking me questions and stuff. So I do like that. It keeps the game a little fresh. It keeps you engaged. It makes you kind of pop up in your seat instead of just saying, yes, go to this planet. Yes, go to this planet. Yes, go to this planet. So I do enjoy that aspect of the game. And sometimes you pop out and you're right in a dogfight in space. There could be any number of ships and even the occasional boss that you take care of. The planet flora and fauna does not really have as much diversity as I wish, and also, as mentioned earlier, the lack of anomalies. So the diversity of wildlife and plants on the planets is sufficient to keep me feeling like I'm finding new things still, but of the 200 or so planets I've been to, about 10 to 20% can even support life, and of those, generally it was the same kinds of living things that were on the planet. So I didn't feel like I was getting cheated because they were different enough, but not in the aspects of alien life that I would expect. Again, I'm not expecting No Man's Sky, Dr. Seuss level things, but I would still enjoy, you know, a larger, crazier looking monster. They don't have to be kaijus on every planet, but just statistically speaking, if you're going to do a game where there are other living things on other planets, I would expect something anomalous like that every now and then. Also, there's no planetary anomalies. I know I already mentioned the lack of space ones, such as black holes or dying stars, but on the planets themselves, the most you get is environmental changes like rain or heavy sun or effects of things. You never really get the cause. I never see a hurricane coming my way. That is another thing I feel like other games that deal with not just space, but other planets you can visit or outside environments way more. They make sure they lean on the environment outside of just what's on the planet. They also deal with the weather of the planet as well, and I feel like that could have been executed a little better. Again, I don't program games, I don't make games. I'm pretty sure they did the best they could, but I feel like adding things like more than just it's heavy winds. You can add a hurricane or a tornado, or maybe asteroids routinely fall on this planet, so you might want to watch out. Things like that I feel like would have been a little bit more interesting. Combat and ship systems. So with this, I'm kind of meaning the combat / weapon / ship, suit, and skill progression all together, because all those kind of fit in one tight bubble because they all kind of bounce off of each other. So first we'll go over the weapon types. So the types of weapons you can find in the game are pistols, rifles, shotguns, heavy weapons, throwables, and melee weapons. There's an average of about 3 to 5 different types of each of those. Some range higher, some range lower, but that's the general amount you're going to find of each. And they all do generally some kind of physical or energy-based damage, or both for some weapons. The ship option types, there's, you know, the big heavy thing they lean on this game was ship creation. So I can't really pigeonhole ships here, but from what I've seen from the RNG of ships that will land on planets, you have exploring vessels, fighting vessels, and trading vessels. So to make it simple, the explorer vessels are really just the ones with bigger engines and a lot of fuel so they can go really far, really fast. The fighting ships are obviously the ones that have much higher maneuverability, they have better engines and better weapons for sure, but at the same time, you could have a tanky fighter ship where maybe you can't maneuver as well, but you've got the best shield and the best weapons, so you're still going to hunt them down. The trading ships, I wouldn't really call them trading ships. It's really just an extreme amount of cargo available on one ship. I think I've built a ship like that just to see how crazy I could get, and I had upwards of like 30,000 pounds that I could carry on that ship. You can just get crazy with your builds. I've seen Optimus Prime builds and all kinds of stuff, but I just want to know, I'm not saying that these are the only 3 types of ships you can build in this game, because obviously they lean so heavy into the ship creation, there's no way you can do that. But you know, if you have enough credits and enough time, you can build all those in one. You can do a great ship with a lot of firepower, really good maneuverability, a fantastic shield, and at the same time you have all the cargo you'll need. So that would be the most advantageous thing to do in the game. The suits really balance defense and offense really well, and part of the suits are also the jetpack, so the mobility aspect of it really gives you a good feel of how you want to interact with everything, especially in combat. The suits come in all shapes and styles, but they generally focus on those 2 aspects of defense and offense. Some have attributes that are really cool, like the chameleon effect, where you turn invisible if you stop moving completely. It's really good for hunting monsters, or if you're hunting down a bad guy, it really helps. One of the most agreed upon downfalls of this game is the loot RNG. Many RNG tests have been done by both players and critics, and none seem to make any sense to the players after the results come out. The best example I have is by a creator named Lieutenant Buzz Lightbeer. I'll add his video at the bottom, where he was reviewing one of the tests done by another player, and the example that he looked at was the player went to New Game +2 and he killed the exact same level 98 boss 100 times. He would kill him, reload the game, kill him again, reload the game. He did that 100 times just to see what the RNG looked like. 2/3 of the drops were all blue items, 24 were epics, and only 10 were legendary. And that's for a level 98 elite boss that he killed. Of the 10 legendary drops, only 4 were melee weapons, 3 were helmets, 2 were guns, and 1 was a navigator pack. So it seems the RNG in terms of the type of thing that drops within the category of legendary is even still really sparse. And I know everyone's gotten that stupid rickshaw blade 1,000 times. I think I have 20 legendary of those for some reason. I don't know what that RNG is for that or what the math is they're using, but that AI needs to be updated significantly. Main skills and leveling. So there are ways to get skills in the game without leveling, so I do like that aspect, but the skills range from extremely useful things, such as increasing your damage or crit chance, your health, and your stamina, and some are things you may never even use once upgraded, like your botany skill, or maybe your leadership skill if you don't even use a team as often. So they do force you to put points into certain parts of the tree so that you can access the lower parts of the tree, which I understand because it forces you to, grind those levels a little bit. It is an RPG from Bethesda, so there's going to be some grinding involved, but I feel like they should have included more skills that would be more useful to how you're going to play the game. I get no one knows how every player is going to play, but there are a lot of skills that even now that I'm 500 hours in, I still have never unlocked and probably will never use just because it's not really how I play. And I've played it both passively and aggressively, and both ways there's so many skills I still never even touched. On the plus side, like I mentioned earlier, they do add some missions and objectives in the game where you gain skills within the skill tree that are very useful in the game. I won't give any spoilers, but there are some very, very useful skills that you'll get for free when doing missions that normally would take you at least putting 15 to 20 skill points into one part of the tree to access. Overall, I'll give this game a solid 8 out of 10. It has some very good key positive points and some very negative points. And the positive, just to name a few, I'd say the combat does feel amazing. It feels fluid. I love the weapon variations and the types of damage you can do. I got lucky, got RNG'd a very strong shotgun early in the game called the Big Bang, and it was a legendary modified. It did a tremendous amount of damage and it carried me through 99% of the game mostly. The story is creative. I like the way that they approached it and the way that it continues through. It does delve into a real physics heavy, game heavy, amazing aspect of it that I just really didn't see coming. The New Game Plus options are written into the story as well, so you can choose to do it. It's not like them just saying, you've beaten the game, do you want to start over again? They wrote it into the story itself to give you the option where it makes sense as to how you can move forward or stay where you are, and I love that aspect as well. The exploration was actually really fun, and when it's compared to things like No Man's Sky, I say it definitely beats it overall. I've mentioned a few million times in this video about the lack of certain anomalies that No Man's Sky has, but No Man's Sky, to me, really fell short in terms of making you feel real on these planets. Everything felt like you were in a cartoon game most of the time in that. And in this, it feels real, sometimes to its detriment, but overall, it definitely gives a more positive, real feel. You may feel like you're running in a straight mile for 30 minutes just to get to one random building you found on your map. But when you get there, it can unlock an entire storyline of a family that's been farming, they're getting attacked, and when you save them, it's not just, here's your credits, bye now. I've had some where they're like, thanks, well, can you help me with this too now? And they got, it just, the RNG of it is just so much better and in depth than I thought it would be. It felt like it'd be very cookie cutter, like 99% of theirs are. And this, I feel like it's not as cookie cutter with the missions. As I mentioned earlier, graphically, I think it looks beautiful. I think obviously there are some short fallings of it in terms of where it may lag a little bit and in terms of the frames you're going to be able to get from it, but I feel like everything's built on comparing it to other things. As it stands by itself, I feel like it definitely succeeded in what they wanted. It may not have hit that high tier they wanted. This isn't the best visual game ever, but for what they delivered, I feel like it was really good. Some of the major negative points. The RNG is absolute dog water in this game. The side missions, in terms of when you're running around and you just hear somebody talk and then it throws a mission up there, those are more interesting than the actual side missions the game will give you sometimes. Because you may hear somebody say, yeah, I heard Billy was fighting this lady and lost some drugs, and you're like, go talk to Billy and see what happened. Billy's got a whole story to give you, so it's not, go get my drugs for me, and then you walk 2 blocks and somebody says, I heard John lost something. He says, go get this for me. So they did change the aspect of what you're doing, but the RNG of the consistency of what the main side missions are is just atrocious. I'm not a fan at all. I feel like they're very repetitive, and most RPGs kind of fall into that hole because it's hard to make them super different, but the game crashing and game breaking issues just seem like a much higher occurrence than I thought there would be, especially when there's simple issues. They're not, and when I say simple issue, I don't mean there's a simple fix. I just mean no one's duplicating Azor's star 500 times like in, you know, Elder Scrolls where you could crash the game that way. I'm just trying to open my map and it will just crash everything. So things like that, I feel like, are simple things that should have been washed out before this game came out. For it to be as expansive as they wanted it, and as big as they wanted it, and as number crunching as they wanted it, something as simple as opening a map has crashed my game fairly consistently. Well, the graphics do look really good to me. I will say it's kind of a double-edged sword because, as I mentioned again a few million times, they focused a lot on the expansiveness of the game and they ended up losing some of the lower level reality-based things like the people eating food. And for the last negative, it's another community and even critic reviewed issue, is that the game is a very slow starting game. If you hold off to get into the factions and exploration while pushing through the story, you may get more interested and get some good insights into the game early on. But from the critic reviews and player reviews that I've seen thus far, it takes between 15 and 30 hours just to even feel like you're in a game that has a story interesting enough for you to want to continue and figure out what's going on. With all that being said, I would recommend getting the game. I do think that it delivers in terms of what Bethesda wanted for a Bethesda RPG game. I think it does fall short in aspects where any RPG would, but we all know Bethesda's specific about how it does things and how they try to build on a lineage of games. They don't just drop a game. So I'm interested in seeing what kind of expansions they can do on this game, what kind of updates they can do, because anybody who played No Man's Sky when it first came out versus playing it now, they will tell you it's day and night. That doesn't mean it's perfect, but that means they have had years to see what they did wrong and they correct it. So I do like that they are already looking at patching things and fixing things, but this, I will say, this is the first Bethesda game that I know of that is an RPG where they patched glitches that benefited the people, like the credit glitch and everything. I get why they did it, but they never did it for anything else, really. So I was a little lost on that when there's so many other bigger issues in the game. Why they wanted to make sure they got rid of that too was just baffling to me. But again, I don't run a giant video game company. All I do is play them, and as the player, I enjoy the game. It's just the slow start kind of held me back a little bit from really getting invested in the story. But once I started to understand how it was progressing, and I started doing the faction missions, and I started finding better weapons and getting cooler gear, it felt more like, okay, I'm playing an RPG. I need to just hunker in and start grinding out, hence me getting to 500 hours. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. Please like, comment, subscribe. Let me know if you disagree, if you agree. Maybe you found some issues that I didn't mention. Maybe something I said was wrong. I try my best to, give my personal experience while also looking at a few things that other people have said, because I can't just say everything is this way because that's how I experienced it, when I know other people are having much better or much worse experiences than I am in some aspects. So try to get a good scoop of everything that's going on and just hit the major things. But yeah, definitely please subscribe if you like the content. Comment whether you like the content or not. Smash that like button, and catch you in the next video.